You're listening to Parasearch UK Radio. News, views and reviews from the world of the paranormal from across the UK and beyond. Find us on Facebook, Twitter and the World Wide Web. Parasearch UK Radio.
The views and opinions expressed by presenters and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Parasearch UK Radio or its affiliates and sponsors. Listener discretion is advised.
You're listening to The Spirit Dimension with your host, Kerry Greenaway, right here on Parasearch Radio.
Good evening and welcome to The Spirit Dimension. My name is Kerry Greenaway and as usual on a Sunday I like to bring you something a little different. Tonight it's no change really. Now there has been a huge rise recently in regards to wellbeing coaches and life coaches, but this is all based in something called positive psychology. Now, tonight on the show, I've brought one of my very good friends into the studio to help get down to the scientific approach that this has sort of all been born from, really. And that's Dr. Cal Cooper. Good evening, Cal. How are you?
I've still got a Pop-Tart in my mouth.
And he does mean a Pop-Tart. That's not a euphemism.
Pop-Tart in my mouth.
Oh, my goodness me. You're making me blush already. Goodness. And we're going to call you Cal, not George, tonight.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
If that's okay, because I think the last time I spoke to you, we called you George all evening.
Oh, that's fair enough.
You know, as we do on this show. So positive psychology, this is actually something that you're a professor at Northampton University, isn't it? This is one of the things you teach there.
Oh, I'm not a professor yet. I had this with, where was I? I was on a show for the States between Canada the other day, and they kept on saying professor, but it was in their terms where anyone that's a lecturer at university is called a professor, regardless of what they got. Here, there's a bigger hierarchy for that in the UK. You have to be elected a chair, so a specialist in that field within your department to get to the rank of professor. So I'm just merely a doctor.
Merely a doctor?
Merely a doctor before that. But I would class myself as a specialist in it. We have at the University of Northampton, uniquely, for the undergraduate course in psychology, so our BSc, Bachelor of Science in Psychology, the 3 years that you go through undergraduate, each and every year we have a module on positive psychology, then on well-being, and then the third level is called motivation and emotion, or I think they've called it applied practice of positive psychology. So it's more so when you get to the third year, it's looking at in jobs, in sports, in education, where can we actually see applications of this research into human emotions? And even though we call it positive psychology, we are also interested in negative traits as well. So there's probably, how many of us? Probably about 5 or 6 specialists in the department. So there's a nice variation of the different research that we've been involved in, and some really lovely overlaps as well. And so the university that we have links with to kind of send our students after the undergraduate degree onto something more, if they've decided that positive psychology is really for them, they can see how it links to future job prospects and how they want to apply their knowledge of psychology. At the moment, we're typically sending them off to Buxton University, where people like Dr. Matthew Smith, Dr. Kieran O'Keefe, they're based down there. They're known for parapsychology. But Matthew Smith is leading the stuff on positive psychology with a gentleman called Dr. Piers Worth. And they have a master's in applied positive psychology. They're called MAP programs. And every year they run a symposium. So with that, they show overlaps with what research we're doing and what they're doing. And then some other universities scattered about the UK that are also engaged as well. But there's only about 5 or 6 different universities in the UK that are really full-on engaged in it and also delivering classes to their students as well.
Wow, so it's bigger business than I thought it was, to be fair. I thought it was, when I looked into it, I'm not going to lie, it sounded very spiritual and very woo-woo. A lot of the traits that it sounds like that. You're probably going to shout at me now, aren't you?
No, I mean, I go to Nottingham Skeptics in the pub, and it's weird when you look at kind of skeptic groups, how sometimes, I suppose I could be considered one of the outcast skeptics there, because I consider myself a true skeptic in knowing what skepticism is and applying it properly, not just pointing the finger at everything and saying no, 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 and then not giving a reason why. And I saw on their Twitter feed at one point this kind of, not that specific group, but skeptic movements in general, this list of different things that they thought were in their kind of top 10 woo-woo to get rid of and debunk. I was just so surprised to see at the top of one of those lists was counselling and psychotherapy is just an absolute nonsense practice. And I thought, well, that's going to really annoy a lot of counsellors and psychotherapists. To see that. And also, we run whole counselling master's courses within the university that get registered by the BACP, so the British Association for Counselling and Psychotherapy, and it takes a lot to get that accreditation as well. It's serious stuff because you're dealing with patients that may have very serious mental health problems that require a series of counselling sessions, and structured ones as well, with various professionals involved to actually get them better. And it might even be incorporated with medication as well if it's taken through a psychotherapy process through to psychiatry as well. So what they're arguing is that the process itself is woo-woo because all you're doing is talking to someone, or they're summing it up as that, as though that's all it is. And there's nothing to it. You could go to your neighbour or your friend and sit down, and that's essentially a counselling session. We've argued that with mediums as well. Surely that's an alternative to bereavement counselling in many ways, but to be a registered counsellor professional is much deeper, and there's much more kind of knowledge and theory and practical experience and expertise involved in becoming an actual certified counsellor or psychotherapist. So I wouldn't call that woo-woo. And to bring it back to positive psychology, yeah, absolutely. People think, well, just learning about happiness and love and anger, what a load of nonsense. I already know what happiness is. There was a researcher called Martin Argyle who did the book, The Psychology of Happiness. And one of the first things he said in his book was, isn't it ironic that people that hate positive psychology and just think it's a load of nonsense, when you tell them such things about the psychology of happiness and they say, there's no research on that, it's nonsense, people don't need to research it, I already know what happiness is. He said it's quite ironic that when you actually present them with research evidence on what happiness is and how we can study it, they get quite angry. So it doesn't make them happy to see happiness research, it just annoys them. And so you're getting the opposite effect. But usually these are people that aren't involved and don't know any better. I've been criticised myself when I've talked about the scepticism of positive psychology. I do think next time I go to a positive psychology conference, I need to give a talk about, why should we be sceptical of positive psychology? But the positive psychologists I've spoken to about this, they all raised an eyebrow and said, what do you mean scepticism towards positive psychology? We've not had any backlash or criticism. But you've got to consider the criticisms you could be faced with. And what you've just said, Kerry, is absolutely one of them. Yeah. Is there really something legitimate to it that we can study? What is the benefit if we do actually start looking at human emotions? Why would we want to do that? So I can understand perfectly why a lot of people would say, well, that's very wishy-washy, woo-woo, airy-fairy. But you have to look at it. You have to dig deep and understand where it's come from and where it's going to understand, that's just as structured as all the other social sciences.
So where did it come from? Because most of the psychology that I sort of came across before I found out this term was about, probably, I suppose you would look at it in a more negative way. So the reasons why people suffer from mental health, a lot of that came out from the wartime, trying to deal with, the negative aspects that it raised within people's psyche regarding that. So where did the positive psychology step in? Where did that flip happen?
I always argue to my students that philosophy and theology had always been onto it. And again, a lot of people think that, well, studying religion's a load of nonsense. It doesn't tell us anything. When you turn to religious studies journals, actual academic papers, even some of the scripture in some ways, it's a very good documentation of observations of human life. So it's a really nice raw basis for understanding social settings and human psychology. And when you get to about the 1950s, 1960s, and I was doing my own research onto the psychology of hope. So we all talk about hope, and we hear about hope being mentioned in films all the time in times of despair. Mm-hmm. When I was looking at the literature, I was noticing this turning point, 1950s, 1960s, of philosophy and theology, where psychology was finally picking it up and saying, this is interesting, we're looking at the psychology of hope here, but people have talked about it from religion and philosophy. How can we study it? What's its cognitive model? How is the brain actually operating when we're in hope? How do we actually go through a process of hoping? How do we go through a process of happiness? How do we go through a process of love? What's the purpose for it as well? How does it benefit us in day-to-day life to actually have these higher powers, these higher emotions? So that's one turning point, I would argue. The other one is that we had the Journal of Humanistic Psychology, which essentially was publishing quite a lot on human emotions and motivation, which eventually, I would argue, it's still going to this day, but the journal that overtook it was eventually the Journal of Positive Psychology. But that wasn't brought up, that wasn't initiated until the work of Martin Seligman around the turning point of the year 2000, when he brought out some books discussing positive psychology, and also arguing the case that we should actually focus on people's well-being and also taking the emotions that we have and trying to better ourselves with them, and looking at comparisons between people that do use emotions for their benefit and understand them, and other people that don't, and just looking at all these pros and cons. So I'd say that the major turning point really is with Seligman. But if you want to see psychology paying attention to these emotional states, I would say the 1950s, 1960s. To mention the Journal of Positive Psychology again, there was another point I was going to make. No, I'll come back to it. You'll probably say something and it'll spark my memory again.
Now, Martin Seligman, you mentioned, actually gave the definitive definition for positive psychology, didn't he? Can you remember what that is, or would you like me to read it?
No, you read it out. I think that'd be better if you quote chapter and verse.
Okay, he said it's the scientific study of optimal human functioning that aims to discover and promote the factors that allow individuals and communities to thrive.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
That sums up positive psychology.
Yes. Yeah. So essentially what I've been mentioning, it's trying to actually better people in every kind of situation. The more that we understand about the emotions and behaviours that we have, the better we can actually make people thrive in an environment. And it overlaps as well, if we're talking about the working setting, apply a positive psychologist to a workspace, or even education as well. So we had this one particular lecture theatre in, it was at Park Campus. So we don't have Park Campus anymore at the University of Northampton, but it was called Cottersbrook, and it was one of the biggest lecture theatres. And some of the psychologists at the time did get involved to find out what was going on. A lot of students that went into that lecture theatre to have lectures came out feeling either very kind of in a daze, they were quite sleepy, or some of them were feeling quite sick after a lecture, and they just weren't feeling motivated at all after they'd been in there for an hour or two. And everyone went in to have a look, and they thought, oh my God, there are a number of factors here that are affecting people's emotions and motivation. And they started to list them. Number one, the sickness may have come from the fact that there was this really unusual vomit green colour that the wall had been painted. But it's such a light shade, though, it wasn't really obvious until you actually kind of had a good look around. You went, oh yeah, practically every surface you look at has that colour, and it's a very odd colour. Another one was that there's no doors or windows to the outside world in that room, so you've got no idea of external light cues, which we call external Zeitgebers, and they kind of give you that cue of what kind of time it is in night and day. So there wasn't that, you were deprived of that natural light. Another one was that there were no clocks in the room on the wall at all, so people would either have to look at their watch or their phone or the time on their laptop if they wanted to get the time, but this was at the time that people weren't really using laptops in lecture, they were just using good old pen and pad. So they got this time distortion going on. Another one as well was they were all lecture seats where you had this flip-out tray that you could lean on and you could write your notes on. They were all right-handed. There wasn't a single one that was actually fitted for left-handed. There was also no disabled access to get to the bottom. There were just 3 sets of staircases, which was really unusual, and yet at the bottom there were disabled ramps. So if someone was in a wheelchair, they would have to have been carried down in the wheelchair in the first place to then be able to use the ramp at the bottom. The list goes on. There are a number of things that people weren't actually recognising. It took people after the fact to go in and actually, start weighing up different things. The students just came out and just felt unwell and really demotivated, and it took it was mainly the occupational psychologists going in, who are also involved in positive psychology with us, that discovered all these different issues. So there, you're discovering the working environment, what's going on, and how can we better that to make people work to their kind of, their best, really. How can we improve their motivation and positive output?
So that just takes it into the working environment. It's basically looking at your environment and seeing what improvements you can make in that context. So when you look at it in regards to life, how do you look at it from a scientific perspective? How can you measure that do you see what I mean? How do you measure the impact something like that has? I mean, from that environment, you can go, well, we made all these changes and the students were coming up with better quality work. They were more attentive in the lesson. There are quantifiable factors you can pick out and go, it made a difference. In life, it's not as easy, is it?
No, not that we can't really turn our own lives into numbers in that way. But if you've read like popular psychology books on positive psychology, like Martin Seligman's work, or Malay Csikszentmihalyi, his book on flow, which has the subtitle "The Psychology of Happiness," but it's not quite about that. Flow is about getting into those altered states of consciousness where, of a night you've sat down and you've treated yourself to a glass of wine, box of Maltesers, popcorn, whatever, and a really good film that you wanted to watch. And maybe you've watched another one after that as well. You've just had a full-on film night, and you look at the time and you're like, oh my God, time's flown by. But you've been so engaged and engrossed in your own kind of self-comfort that time has flown. But there's a form of what we would call flow. You've been in a state of flow. Time has just flowed on, and you've been so engaged, you've shut off the world around you. But to your own benefit, it's good for you when you're in those kinds of states. I get it personally from when I go to the gym and I go swimming. I can just be swimming length after length, and I'm doing it underwater, so I feel like I'm in another world. I feel like I'm flying, and that's probably also why when I dream about flying, I'm doing breaststroke. So I'm relating those two worlds together, but I feel in a complete state of flow because, again, I will look at the clock and go, oh, God, I shouldn't have been here for so long. I need to get out and do things, and I'll have to quickly get out. Many other things. You could be washing the parts, driving a car, running an errand, things like that, and you'll realise you've lost a passage of time. So there's some basic ones. But if you are aware of the different positive traits that you have, there are different scales that you can take to look at your top 5 best traits and try and work on them. You could look at how you're already using them and also kind of better yourself with them as well, try and improve them. And you can look at those traits that are bottom of the scale as well, see if you can bring those up a little bit. So you can just see that in your day-to-day life and how other people react towards you as well. You could actually, fill in some of these scales yourself just to see an improvement over time. But if they're really working, you should actually start to see some benefits to your own mental health. If you do suffer from anxiety or bouts of depression, if you've taken positive traits and tried to work on them more, do you feel that you're having less anxiety attacks or anxiety moments and less depressive times and periods because of how you're harnessing positive psychology? So there's a variety of applications you could take. From my point of view, what I'm doing, I'm all in that kind of base level of taking measurements and how do we compare one situation against the next to really show that there are differences. I suppose another basic level is I mentioned those 3 modules we have, year 1, 2 and 3. And students don't have to take them all. They are all elective modules. But we've discovered that when we've compared students that only took 1 module of positive psychology, or students that only took 2 modules of positive psychology, and all the students who took all 3 modules of positive psychology, those who overall, on all their other modules as well, that have got the best grades, the highest grades, are those that engaged in 3 modules of positive psychology. Next step down is those that engaged in 2, and the next step down, those that engaged in 1. And I suppose you could even take the next stage. I'd have to go back to look at the results, but I guess those that engaged in none at all, I would predict that they did worse off. So, even on those basic levels of just being out there, sitting in such lectures, being of positive emotions and what they do for you and how you can benefit yourself has an impact on many other things that you're doing, your engagement in different tasks and day-to-day life and socialization.
Looking at that then, do you think it would be a positive thing? Well, it's going to be a positive thing, but because it's positive psychology. But do you feel then that this is something we should be looking at from a very basic, from a basic education level? It should be something that's introduced into maybe like a life class within schools, going right through from like primary school going through. Do you think that's something that would be a massive change in regards to how we're teaching children?
I suppose. There are basic levels of it. Certainly for some children with learning difficulties where it's also incorporated a lack of emotional awareness, that they might have support staff that actually teach them about facial expressions, where, with certain forms of, say, Asperger's, for example, they might not be showing necessarily the correct emotional response to certain situations. So they might have support staff in there to actually do one-to-one sessions about, as I say, facial expressions and what we use different emotions for, when they're appropriate and when they're not appropriate. The next level beyond that, I do remember in primary schools, there's different things where they have put happy faces and sad faces and things like that and what they mean. But you could actually, sculpt a different week by saying, look, I've got happiness written at the top of the board and it's staying there all week because the theme of the week is happiness. And so then incorporating a little bit of something to do with happiness into each day, or forgiveness or gratitude and things like that.
Yeah, the more positive emotional spectrum.
Yeah, absolutely. They even used to do it in a funny kind of way in Sesame Street, where each episode, even though different things were happening in each episode of Sesame Street, ultimately every episode was sponsored by something. So you could sponsor a week by an emotion. They sponsored Sesame Street episodes by a number and a letter. And so the number and the letter would theme the episode, and you would get all kinds of different things going on, like you would have all different classes of a day, but there's still an overarching theme that might now and then crop in for you to be aware of, or even just take in unconsciously as well. And there you've improved your awareness for it, just because there's these subtleties about how happiness or gratitude or forgiveness or whatever else operates and how it can be kind of manipulated and used to better people in their day-to-day lives. So, yeah, I guess there could be some ways of actually bringing it in. When I talk to teachers anyway, they're already overloaded with the various things that they've got to do. I think sometimes the last thing they want to hear is what researchers have done at university and how they can improve their classes. Yeah. When I don't think many lecturers at university would be very capable of taking on a primary school class all day or secondary or beyond. It's just a really to get into and want to stay in as well. So trying to incorporate some of these things aren't always easy, but there are always ways, and a lot of schools do like to try and take on these ideas as well. So I agree with where you're coming from, though. I think it is a good idea if it were possible, if it were taken on.
There is a thing called growth mindset that a lot of primary schools do these days, which sounds very, very much like what you're talking about, embracing their positive traits within individual positive traits. Because everybody's very individual with what they're good at. And this, when you spoke earlier, you said pick out 5 positive traits, and 99% of people will find that quite difficult, but be quite happy to list their negative traits. So it's flipping that mindset over into that positive mindset, isn't it?
Yeah, I suppose there's a lot of people that would kind of self-target things about themselves and like to say that, they're a very kind person or things like that. But with the scales that you can take to look at your top positive traits, you're asked a series of questions anyway. So you can't necessarily just handpick your top 5 traits. The questionnaire itself is generating what it believes, based on your answers, your top 5 traits are. I can't believe I've forgotten what it's called. Hang on, I'm going to have to look it up. Just so it's
one of those moments where you go, I know the name, I can't think of it.
You keep talking and I'll tell you what it is.
Oh gosh, talking about positive
just
psychology.
Anything.
Well, I'm looking at the chat room, so just thank you so much for joining me tonight in the chat room while Carl's having a little Google. I want to give a little shout out. I've got Gemma in there. I've got Mr. Professor Nib in there. I call him the Professor, by the way, Kat, just so you know.
This is American.
Exactly. Rick, hi Rick, how are you? We've got Penny and we've got Joe, and Richard is in there as well. Thank you. Elizabeth. Hello, Elizabeth. How are you? Lots and lots of people in the chat room with us tonight. Totally getting on board with this positivity rather than negativity that seems to be out and about these days. And have you found it yet? Come on, I'm waffling.
Yeah, there's an exact word, though, that's not even coming up. Rachel used it so much, but it is part of Seligman's work, and there are 24 different character strengths. And I just wanted to find an absolute link for it that I could kind of give to the listeners. So there's different ones. There's inventories of strengths and values and things like that, but Seligman lists 24. Seligman's trait scale of character strengths. It's not cropping up, but it's Seligman's work, and so through his scale, which the exact title that Rachel kept using has just gone completely over my head, which is really embarrassing. But if you go through Seligman's work, you will actually find it. And 24 character strengths? No. I'm just going to annoy myself if I keep looking. Anyway, you do a series of questions. You can't handpick them. And once you've finished, it will give you all the listing of different ones, but separate the top 5 as well. And so if you're going through any kind of particular program with a positive psychologist to try and better yourself in day-to-day life, you would work on these different character strengths that have been generated for you. And some of them really surprise different people as well. And we have a variety of students that are doing psychology with counselling, psychology with education, sometimes psychology with drama, psychology with sports. And it's nice to see sometimes with the sports where you get some of the sports students where they clearly come up as having some good strengths, but they're certainly a follower. So that's good because it makes them a team player, whereas you get other ones that come out with leadership as a top thing as well. So, in a sort of sports setting, then it's nice that it comes across that usually those people are in a position of leadership. If it's football, they're a team captain or things like that. And so it's great that those traits are shining through, whereas with others, they have no intention of being a leader in any way, shape or form, but they want to contribute to a team, and that's their positive drive, that they're making a difference and being part of that team and making an effort in that way, whereas other people prefer to be in that position of power and actually lead a team rather than, control or bully. So they're doing it in the true professional way and the right way as well. Leadership is not a bowler hat. Leadership isn't bullying. It's working with people and empathizing and guiding the team.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So was you thinking of the CSV handbook?
Mm-mm.
No, that's something different.
No, that's not what I'm thinking of.
Right. Okay. No. Anyway, we'll move on.
I'm just trying to think, where the hell has this come from? It is Seligman, and it is 24 character strengths, but there's a specific term we've been using a lot regarding it, and I just wanted to say that, and so now it doesn't matter anymore. I've said where it's from. It's Seligman stuff. If you follow Seligman, you'll find it.
No worries. We'll move on. So there are 3 levels of positive psychology, I understand.
What do you understand by that? Because I wouldn't necessarily argue that, but what have you found?
Well, this is on the Positive Psychology website.org one, and it says there's a subjective level, the individual level, the group level. Don't laugh, mate. I had a crash course in this tonight. Bearing in mind, I'm looking and thinking, I knew about this. No, I didn't know about this at all. In the subjective level, the individual level, and the group level. Okay,
yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, so we don't necessarily kind of preach that because we're getting people to engage and read on positive psychology in all different walks of life. But definitely that isn't a mistruth or anything like that. Certainly, you can follow it through those different levels. How are people projecting positiveness onto other people? How do people do it for themselves? And we'll keep that first and foremost, the core. How do you actually better yourselves with it? How do you project it onto others? And then also in the social setting as well. So you've got these individual experiences, the experiences from others that are receiving positive psychology, and then also where is it being applied in the social setting as well.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Because all these 3 things together kind of have a massive impact on your mental well-being, don't they?
Yes.
So what is it about recognizing what makes you feel good and then changing it if it doesn't make you feel good?
Yes, I suppose so. I mean, sometimes there's nothing you can do about it, really. I mean, as I mentioned with the setting, sometimes if it's an environment, occupational psychologists and positive psychologists have gone in and changed it, and they've done subtle environmental techniques to make people feel more motivated. I know with a lot of office spaces, again, they found that lack of natural lighting has made people feel very depressed and demotivated. But other times it's just not having a place decorated often enough. It's really strange how they've actually done studies to show that having new furniture in or new office stationery and new desks and things like that, and even just repainting, even if the walls are white and they're just repainted white again, the smell of fresh paint or fresh carpet really motivates people when they see that the working environment or whatever environment they're in has been spruced up, it's been tidied up, someone's actually put some time, attention, care into it as well. But with those three different areas that you mentioned, if you've got an understanding of all of them, how am I personally experiencing happiness, for example? How are other people experiencing happiness when they're in a situation with me and I'm experiencing it, maybe even laughter? How's it projecting onto other people? How does it make them feel in that kind of environment? And then in the wider social context as well, what's the benefit to it in working environments and social settings as well? I think one level that they've left out on that three-step thing as well is, ultimately what's the evolutionary purpose as well for things like happiness and love and things like that. Is it to do with social bonding? Does it create a tighter social group and a more secure social group? And if we've got a tighter social group, then we know that aids our survival. You only have to turn to the animal kingdom and look at tight social groups, especially with apes and bonobo monkeys, to actually see how they live and how their groups operate as well. So we can see all kinds of different evolutionary benefits as well to different emotions as well. So you can go that far back, understand its purpose and what it's for, and then how people are experiencing it, projecting it onto others, and the greater social benefits of today as well, to see ultimately how can we improve things.
So how does this translate in regards to dealing with some of the more serious issues that the psychologists have to deal with? Can they treat more serious psychological conditions with positive psychology rather than dealing with the issue behind the illness?
To some extent, yeah, it does. To some extent, I think most psychologists would sooner treat a psychological issue as far as they can with psychotherapy or counselling, without the need for any medication taking place or treatment to that level. If you can just get the brain to retrain itself and cope with the situation by just trying to see an alternative perspective, then fantastic. And sometimes it just takes a different perspective from the counsellor or a unique experience to make that happen. I mean, there's a new book, brilliant plug really for that point, Science Psychotherapy, that should be out, if not next month. And it was one of Alex Tannis's unpublished manuscripts, and essentially he'd been spotted for his alleged ability to heal people, and he'd been noted by a psychiatrist called Dr. Elaine Swinge for doing this, and she said, would you come into the psychotherapy setting and try and help with the course of treatment based on your experience of healing and helping people and your positive words? He was a qualified counselling psychologist for the state of Massachusetts as well, so he'd been through training. And when he went into these counselling settings, psychotherapy settings, he's documented in this book, Science Psychotherapy, what's actually happened. And he, as a psychic, went kind of into their mind, as he describes it, and goes back to the very reasons as to why they're having problems at all. So it skips out to some extent the traditional psychotherapy route and practice of counselling that person to then decide what the next course of treatment was. To meet an individual like Alex, who was oozing positivity and in a way presenting a lot of positive psychological traits like a positive psychologist onto the patient, you can see in the writing how much it's helping that person, sometimes without the need at all for medication. Some of the course of treatment went down that route because Elaine Swinge was a medical doctor, and in that setting she was qualified to prescribe medication because she was a psychotherapist in that setting. And that sometimes happened. But with him, more or less presenting positive psychology, as we mentioned in the foreword, we can see it oozing through. They've managed to get some people better help. They followed them up over time, and they seem to be recovering really well without the need for any intervention. And yet some of them were suffering from really bad psychological side effects of whatever the initial problem was, anything from people suffering anorexia and bulimia, and it really impacting on their health, through to extreme drug abuse as well. We're seeing some changes just from words of wisdom and positive psychology being instilled in some of these people. So, yeah, I think to some extent it can really help people. Other times, though, if you haven't got any other options, then medication's resorted to. But I think any psychologist would prefer that a psychological intervention should be first and foremost. And if that helps, then you've taught the brain to just deal with it as is. Remember, if someone's on medication for depression or anxiety and they seem fine, well, yeah, the medication's suppressing an issue that's already there. You've essentially just put an elastoplast on it. That the issue is still underneath what you've bandaged up. So sometimes it's far better, if you are suffering from anxiety or depression, to try out these different therapies just to teach your brain to see it in a slightly different way and get it to actually naturally cope with the situation rather than mask it. Because if you come off the medication, then you're back to square one again, where the brain is struggling to actually deal with that kind of situation. So there's a practical application of where positive psychology, mixed with a few other things, can really help people.
You mentioned in there physical healing in regards to how your brain is, how you cope with something. So when you have a serious illness, for example, or a serious challenge regarding your physical well-being, positive psychology would help with that too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you've got two different levels of it as well, where we call it the power of positive thought, and it's acting as a placebo. So placebo essentially means I will help, and then you've got the opposite effect of nocebo, which means I will harm. And we can see when we even do drug trials that in some cases, I think it was about 45% of cases of drug trials in general, where people were told the negative side effects of drugs that they were taking, even if they were a subject that was taking the sugar pill, so the false one, not the one that's being trialed, because they've randomly assigned, they want to see, is the pill that we've developed genuinely doing what it needs to do, but we still have this obligation to tell all participants what the potential negative side effects are. 45% of people taking the sugar pill still develop the negative side effects, which could be, hair loss, constipation, bouts of anxiety, things like that, and they develop it just because they've been given that suggestion, that negative suggestion that it might occur. And so you can get the opposite effect as well, and it's seen brilliantly in children as well. I've seen it when, like children are struggling sleeping and they don't want to go to bed, and you just go to the tap and you get a special glass from the cupboard that's used for, whiskey or other things like that, so it's an unusual shape. And you say, here, I've put some special sleeping water in there. Mm-hmm. So if you have that, it'll help you sleep. And because they've got that suggestion, and it's just ordinary water, of course, they then go back to bed and they go to sleep. And you can see that even all the way through to adults, though, because we know that if you've taken medication, it's meant to digest in your stomach and do something to you. We always get that definition drilled into us from being a child with DARE programs. So drug is any substance other than food that affects the way that our mind and body work. And so you know that to take it, it's going to do something. So having a positive stimulation as well can really have an impact as well. We're seeing a positive thought or a negative thought, some sort of stimulus in the middle that kind of helps support it as well. Here's your evidence, here's the pill. And then afterwards, you're having some sort of physiological impact as well. It doesn't always necessarily have to involve medication, though. Sometimes you can have people kind of saying things to you and it makes you feel better. People that suffer from skin complaints and things like that, if you've got a bit of eczema or psoriasis, have you ever had that situation where you've got into an argument with someone at work, or there's a really nasty email exchange going on that's got to be resolved, and it really pisses you off and your skin flares up? Mm-hmm. Because it's raised your anxiety, it's really annoyed you, it's a bad psychological impact, and it has a physiological response. But other times you can have the reverse effect. You've had a really good week at work, you've been praised for doing something, everyone's been really friendly and nice, someone's brought you a packet of biscuits one day, no skin complaints that week. Really weird, didn't even need moisturiser or creams to help it out, it just wasn't there. And then, another week it flares up again. It's all about mindset sometimes, how you're thinking, how you're feeling, it has that impact. Our mind and body are working together all the time. And it's interesting because in some ways people say, well, isn't that interesting? It's an internal psychokinesis effect. Your mind is having an impact over body, mind over matter. And so there we're seeing a kind of a nice kind of example that we can all relate to of positive psychology in practice on the self, that subjective experience. But there's the measurable thing as well. How's it impacting your body, your health, and how you're feeling afterwards?
Yeah, your body is definitely a yardstick as to how you feel. I would definitely agree with you there. Now, you spoke about reprogramming your mind. What steps can you take to help reprogram your mind? Do you have to go down to a psychologist or something like that? Or are there steps you can take in a day-to-day level for yourself?
Of course, on an extreme level, you could go to a psychologist if you're having problems, and you might go for psychotherapy, or if you are having depressive or anxiety states, you might go through cognitive behavioural therapy, and there are different things you could do there. I'm even working on the beginnings of colour therapy as well, which is a new alternative to cognitive behavioural therapy, where you'll focus on different colours with a therapist, and then go out into the real world, and when you're having, say, an anxiety attack, your colour of the day that you focused on to help you relax may be yellow, and so you start looking around for yellow to help calm you down, either on painted railings, double yellow lines in the road, you name it. There's different things. So that could be a therapist through to you then doing that intervention. But there are there are some self-help books that are absolutely god-awful, and it's no wonder they're in bargain bins. But there's other ones, if you turn to Seligman, where, yes, he's a psychologist, yes, he's talking about research, but he's tried his best to make sure that many of his books can be read by anyone. So you can see what has the research done, and how can we better ourselves. So I'd say most people can buy those kinds of books, and Flow by Malay Csikszentmihalyi, and there's a few other ones. I'm looking over at my shelf and I can even see, because Derren Brown started to approach self-help stuff, and he did a book called Happy. I think its subtitle was Why Everything is More or Less Okay. I think I looked through it a little bit, but I don't think I was overly impressed so far. I'll keep going through it, though, and reserve judgment. But, of course, you can improve yourself through self-help and, using some of your own common sense once you've actually just read and exposed yourself to, well, here's a different way of thinking about it. So I'd say on a basic level, if you just want to change your outlook, improve your positivity, lessen that depression, lessen that anxiety, sleep better at night, and I suppose show more awareness for your health and fitness and things like that, just read some of these books. I mean, you can even contact me through my website at callumeCooper.com or on Twitter at Callum E. Cooper, and just message and say, are there any books you can recommend, and I can give you lists of them. But on the more extreme level, you might go and see a counsellor, psychotherapist, positive psychology, and they might give you some initial talks and then develop with you a self-help program where you might actually turn to all these different positive traits, your top 5, and how you can work with them.
And that's partly it, isn't it? It's about embracing the good within you, the good traits within you, and recognising that there are really your strengths rather than focusing on your weaknesses, and seeing where that's applied in your life, and focusing on that more than the negative day-to-day crap that goes on around you. Mm-hmm.
I mean, some of them are really extreme. I mean, some people have even opted for alternative therapies with things like cancer rather than going for traditional chemotherapy and other things like that. I've always thought, well, that isn't the safer option really to combine chemotherapy and traditional medicine with some of these alternative therapies, but there have been some remarkable cases where people opted out and they felt so positive about some of the alternative therapies they went for, or even in some rare cases, Tanis comes up as another example again, of going to a psychic healer where, the doctors have said, I'm sorry, that's it, there's nothing we can do for you. And they've gone to these healers or used this alternative therapy, gone back to their doctor, and there's no sign of the cancer anymore. That's how much, forget there being anything paranormal going on in terms of that healer or the alternative therapy actually, doing anything. It's the fact that they gave it a chance and they really thought it would make a difference. Have we there got another example again of how fantastic the mind's power over the body can actually be when you kind of self-help and you think so positively about something genuinely helping you, that you can rid yourself in some extreme case of cancer or speed up your healing as well. A broken arm, and they say, it's going to take 6 or 7 weeks to even begin to heal, and for some weird reason it's healed in 3. Yeah. Why has that happened? So there's some more examples again.
Well, funny you should mention this particular area, because I'm currently reading Guy Leon Playfair's book, Is This Magic?, which is actually looking at hypnotisation and mesmerisation in regards to healing and faith healing. I've only just started this book, I would just like to add. And some of the studies that have been done, and in regards to cancer patients, it's been astonishing. And this is sometimes people that have, like you said, opted out of treatment, but sometimes it's running alongside treatment as well.
Yeah.
But the difference to people's lives has been absolutely astonishing, and it's a shame that it's not being embraced in a more everyday way within hospitals, isn't it? Or, you know, the medical profession.
Well, we had, I remember when I was at the SPR conference in 2009, and we had a researcher from China. He had to have a translator there with him for the question and answer. He did a really good presentation, though, that he'd rehearsed for the English translation. And he was talking about Qui-Gon healing, and I was really impressed because it was 9 case studies of people with cancer. I think a couple of them were terminal conditions, and a few other ones were just the odds were really against them. They all went through this series of Qui-Gon healing, where it was a hands-off healing, so the hand is always about a foot away from the body. But they went through this treatment. There's been some studies that have tried to look at, there's this, you know, really terrible term of this energy transfer, but more so looking at, you know, is there some sort of heat transfer? Is there something measurable in terms of if we look at heat in the body of the healer and the heat in the body of the healee? You know, are we getting unusual temperature changes when something is taking place, as though there's a transfer? And with this doctor, he said in all the cases, those 9 cases that he looked at, everyone had been cured of their cancer, which was remarkable. But Dr. Glenn Hitchman, he recently went out to, I'm sure it was Japan, even though this researcher was from China. I'm sure Glenn went to Japan recently. And he went to it was a parapsychology conference that had been set up, but not with any known parapsychologists. They'd invited people from the UK that were known to do their research, present on their research, and then with what they were doing over there. And Glenn said one of these was quite shocking. He showed me the proceedings in this paper. And so obviously I couldn't read the text, but I was looking at these pictures, and I said, are they cancer patients? Because there's a lot of people there that were starting to look very skeletal, and they lost their hair. And he said, yeah, and he said it was quite an upsetting study because it was regarding alternative therapies that these people had insisted on and didn't want the alternative medical treatment. But he said even though the researcher was talking about, you know, was this healing working, all of those patients died. And so, you know, I'd gone from hearing one study that was remarkable to another study that was quite similar, and everyone had died. So the alternative therapy in that case had not helped whatsoever. Which, you know, it puts a dampener on that first study and makes you think, well, why was Qui-Gon healing working in this first set of remarkable cases and not in this other one?
Well, and that is the problem, isn't it, with that kind of healing? And that this is the theme. Even even Guy Leon Playfair was saying this is the problem because it's not quantifiable, and what works for one doesn't work for another. He cited a skin condition. It's got a really strong, weird name, ichneodosis or something, which is basically warts all over the skin. And they had looked, the hypnotist at the time, Newton, I believe his name was, had basically cured him through this reprogramming of his mind with hypnotism. But when he tried to repeat that with another patient, it didn't work. And this is the problem with that particular avenue, isn't it? So how much then, it leads you to ask the question then, how much is actually dependent on the actual person?
I think, we've got a whole multitude of psychological variables to play with. If you turn to any exceptional experiences, we know that certain people are only prone to it. We've got differences between sexes, sometimes differences between ages, educational level, not so much between race, but again, there are other things beyond that. You could have highly sensitive persons might show a different reaction to non-highly sensitive persons. Schizotypy we could look into.
What does that mean? Sorry, what does that bit mean?
Well, we're just going to, again, very psychological variables and susceptibility to different things, really. I'm just kind of listing. Okay. We could do a whole show on schizotypy.
Okay.
What was the other one that I was just reading into now? Because I was just going over near-death experiences as well, and some of the things. There was something in that was a susceptibility level. there was imagination proneness as well, but there was a different term for it. So, as I say, I mean, there's loads of them, and there's more variables, I think, between individual psychology and how one person's going to react compared to the next. Because, you know, you and I, we may have loads of things in common that we like, but we've probably got more things not in common that we don't like, or different things that psychologically we don't react to that are completely different. But in terms of our own physiological makeup, that's far more similar than our own psychology. And so even though I might take a drug to make myself better for something, and you take a drug as well for that very same condition, and we're both cured, it is more likely that we're both going to get cured with that drug than we are from some sort of psychological therapy, because there are too many variables at play. But that's also showing as well that people's physiology, to some extent, down the line, it is different, because not everyone reacts well to a drug. Some people have a bad reaction to a drug, or some people have no reaction at all. So on the whole, you get more reactions and more repeatable findings by taking medication and having an impact on your psychology or physiology. But we do realise that, generally speaking, in some different applications of positive psychology, counselling, psychotherapy, suggestibility, you know, hypnotism and things like that, we can get large groups of people to react, more so if we know that there are certain psychological variables that are conducive to that type of treatment. But if you didn't take those variables into consideration, just took 100 people or so, you might not get any more than 50 people responding to it, which compared to drug trials is appalling. Because you would hope that with a drug, with things like penicillin and antibiotics and things like that, even though at the moment we're starting to see a lull in antibiotics and people reacting to it, generally speaking, though, we would expect most people on the whole to react to it. But it's because, you know, you're just dealing with physiological makeup, which on the whole isn't like psychology. It's pretty much the same across the board, though we do realise there are some differences sometimes. But more of that fits inside the bell curve than people's similarity in terms of their psychological variables. They're way, way out there. They're all over the place.
So it's not a one-shoe-fits-all scenario, is it?
No,
with positive
this
psychology.
No, this is why I argue that I hate it when people say psychology is one of the soft sciences. Well, how is it? I mean, the hard sciences are described as biology, physics, and chemistry, because they're dealing with all these different variables that you can measure and they're repeatable. But I think, well, that makes it easy to some extent, doesn't it? Because we know that if we boil water and it gets up to 100 degrees C, we're expecting it to be boiling at that state. And if it's down at 0, then it's frozen. That's pretty straightforward to me. But if I put someone in a room with certain things going on, it doesn't mean to say that the very next person that comes into the room is going to react in the same way. Or that first person is going to react in the same way the very next morning when I do the same thing, or the morning after that. They might have had an argument that morning. They might have felt unwell that morning. They might have seen something in the evening that put them off about what they were going to do the next day. They can change. We all change so much. Trying to pin down people's behaviour, emotions, and get repeatable effects in terms of psychology, I think is very difficult. It's like trying to nail jelly to the wall. Yeah. And so it's very strange when people say, you know, they turn to things like parapsychology and say that's got no repeatability effect. I've seen far more repeatability effects in my own experience and from looking at the literature with trying to find psi across the board, so ESP functioning across the board, than I have in human emotions. And in those studies as well, I find some of the repeatability effects in general psychology sometimes quite appalling. But I understand why, though, because we're dealing with something that's not actually hard to, you know, grasp and stick it inside a box and say, stay there. It's all over the place. It's constantly flowing. It's constantly on the move. We're just starting, I think, to scratch the surface and really understand and appreciate how many variables are involved. So we get a broad sense of how we react and behave, but it doesn't mean to say that just because you put person A in situation B to improve their positive psychology, it's going to work for everyone. It just doesn't work like that with people.
It certainly doesn't. Now, I said right at the top of the show that there's been a huge rise in regards to well-being and life coaches out there. Do you think that these people aren't necessarily going through the university teachings of psychology or positive psychology? They're sort of picking up tips and stuff off net or wherever it is that they go, off net.
Internet.
What impact do you think that's having?
So are you suggesting that there might be a lot of life coaches that have got fraudulent qualifications?
I wouldn't necessarily go that far. But
no?
I would say that maybe there are lots of people that think they can do it but may not necessarily have gone through the right processes.
Okay. Yeah.
I wouldn't go as strongly as saying fraudulent, but I would, maybe. I don't know. Very careful there. I'm being very careful, it is.
Yeah. I would say, though, it is a fair warning. There are a lot of bogus qualifications on the internet, and if you really want to become, especially a positive psychologist, but then after that, let's just say the life coach, really ask yourself the question: if you've just done the course on the internet and you've not had any interaction with another life coach, you've not sat down face to face with them, you've not had practice clients, so other students to actually practice the process of life coaching on, and it's all just come off a multiple choice or a couple of tasks on whatever, a couple £100 certificate that it's cost you, really ask yourself, have you genuinely learned from that process and feel yourself to be confident and legitimate in that sense to be practicing? Because most people, turn to the counselling and psychotherapy setting. That's several years of seeing hundreds of people to counsel. Could be other students, could be volunteers, to actually build up your hours and show that you are experienced with a variety of different potential outcomes and how people might react. Life coaching isn't necessarily a straightforward thing where the person sits there and says, I'm having problems with this, give me some sort of new life plan that I can work to. What if they're talking to you and they break down? What if they're talking to you and they start to cry? What if they're talking to you and they actually try and attack you at one point? Do you understand all the safeguards involved? Do you understand the ethical processes to go through? Do you understand what to do if you have to refer them to someone else, or how to refer them to someone else, another specialist beyond yourself? There are so many things to actually consider. So if you have gone through the formal training, fair enough. There are a lot of people that have their own practices or act independently as life coaches, and they build up their client basis, and good on them. There might even be some life coaches that didn't go through any qualifications whatsoever. They've just read really well and they've practiced the technique and it works. To that, I would actually still take my hat off, because if they're running a practice, they're doing it professionally, then they have to comply and make sure that what they're doing is ethical. And to some extent, I would have hoped they were insured in some way as well, just in case there are those backlashes from their clients with extreme cases. You always, in those kinds of situations, whatever process you've gone through, to be whatever it is you're labeling yourself as, you've gone through that process to make sure that when you're practicing, when you're trying to improve other people's lives and empathize with their life, you are safe in that environment to do it, and they are safe, and you are aware of all the potential outcomes that could occur as well and how to deal with them.
Thank you so much for joining me tonight, Cal. It's been an absolute pleasure. Tell everybody what you've been up to recently, because I know you've got loads of projects on the go, but what is it you're releasing right now for people to read from?
Okay, so basically if you want to talk to me further, you can go to my Twitter page, which is just Callum E. Cooper. That's Callum with 2 L's, or go to callumecooper.com. The most recent thing that came out was I contributed the foreword to Haunted Castles by John Mason and Roland Rotherham. It's not on Amazon. If you want to get a copy of it, the limited edition, so you have to email John directly. So his email is lostgod1, that's the number 1 rather than written out, at AOL.com, lostgod1 at AOL.com. So I did the foreword for that, and it's all lovely infrared photography of different haunted castles. But coming out hopefully either at the end of this month or next month is the long-awaited Psy in Psychotherapy by Alex Tannis, Elaine Swinge and Andrew Bambrick. And I did the foreword with Stanley Krippner, Professor Adrian Parker did the afterword, and it's just taken a long time to really tidy up this manuscript that was finished in 1985 but never published. It involves some of the things that we've just been talking about in this show, and that will end up on Amazon. It'll be a paperback and as Kindle, and it's published by White Crow Books. So keep looking on their website for any updates, and on my social media I'll advertise that when it comes out soon.
I'm looking forward to reading that one. I'll be honest with you, I've been looking forward to that one for a little while. Well, thank you so much once again for joining me on the Spirit Dimension. I love talking to you. You always bring a wealth of information and knowledge with you. So thank you so much.
As I enjoy talking to you.
Oh, see, this is another reason why I like talking to you, Cal. You make me feel so good. Positive psychology right there, guys. Don't forget, everybody, we have shows on every single night of the week. And if you want to hear what's coming up for the week ahead, watch me live on the Parasearch Radio group page. And if you miss any of our shows, don't forget, pop over to our YouTube channel and click like, share and subscribe. And on that note, thank you once again, Cal, for joining me. And we bid you a very farewell. Good night.
A pleasure. Sweet dreams.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to join us for more shows throughout the week. Find us on Facebook, Twitter and the World Wide Web to keep up to date with all the shows right here on Parasearch Radio.